presentation to the interaction. So this particular project started in a way in trying to find out how I could do an arts project. I wanted to publish a book about the Day of the Dead in Mexico. That's how the whole project came about. And it wasn't until I came back from my initial experience of death in Mexico that I realized that I didn't come back with anything new that others were not already saying. And we're already doing a very good job in itself. So what could I do that was different? What could I come back with or interrogate this particular space in a manner that was innovative and fresh? And I didn't fall under the same trap of many journalists or other artists that get overwhelmed by the aesthetics of art and the aesthetics of the material and of the object and of commemorations and rituals and so forth. Because it's quite easy to be overwhelmed by this richness and color and not be able to go beyond it, because you need to get very, very deep as to why this happens the way it happens. So it will make a little bit more sense as I go on. I'll give you a short presentation in relation to the research that I did in Mexico City. I was looking at primarily concentrating on the cemeteries and cemetery life. And looking at cemetery life as a social totality in a Marxian kind of sense. The total social, economics, labor, and all the kind of aspects, that the politics of the cemetery and so forth. And at the same time, why it was that I encountered particularly this image that presents the project. Why is it that now in cemeteries we no longer have the text to describe who the dead is? And that's quite unusual, because if you walk to any cemetery, there will always be an RIP, such a person is buried here from year to year. And if you look at this example, that doesn't exist. And you will understand a little bit more why this is a mausoleum. As a grave, the text is no longer necessary. And there's a very specific reason for that. And what makes these images here so powerful in its own sense. So I'll begin with the presentation. Obviously you can ask me questions soon after that, but I shall begin. Okay. In this paper I briefly discuss how the dead in Álvaro Obregón, which is one of the area, the neighborhood that I was concentrating my project in, have been materialized, objectified and embedded into the social consciousness of my informants' collective and private processes of memory making. To enable the research to interpret the material culture of death, I had to dig deeper at the social spaces in which objects are located, used, stored, and displayed. The research revealed that social cultural bodies of the dead in Álvaro Obregón, as in Mexico City, are transformed, legitimized, located, embodied, and given agency via daily and yearly commemorative rituals and processes of recall through my informant's social exchanges with their dead. Material culture can assist the body turn into vehicles or extensions of social experiences. Social agents are assisted and legitimized by the use and appropriation of material culture. So in this I look at Gell's idea of the agency and how does an object become an agent. And in this particular sense, because objects also have biographies, social biographies, living biographies of the person that entrusted life into these objects. So in essence, socializing the dead through processes of extending personhood and agency onto the material object, which is discussed by Parkin, the research explored how material culture, including the use and practice of photography, provides my informants channels for expressing grief and other intense feelings relating to loss. The research project also uncovered how the materiality of the dead, assisted by objects and photography, acted as mnemonic processes of memory making. And what do I mean by the materiality of the dead? You have to remember that we are also bodies. We're also made out of matter. It might be organic, but this is also something as tangible as this is. You know? So, and this, there is something in the outside, but there's something in the inside, and there's also something which is beyond these two double processes, and that's what this is kind of about. So during my extended visits to the cemeteries of Álvaro Obregón during 2003 and 2007, and noticed an increased presence of objects and the use of photographic images used as memorials. Images that are normally associated or taken from the comfort of the family album or the privacy of the family home. So these particular images were not made specifically for the cemetery. These were taken from family albums, these were taken from the privacy of these families, of these people, and were brought onto the cemetery space. So visual images have transformed the field and become permanent pictures and site-specific in the cemetery. In the cemetery, we now find a combination of sacred, secular, popular, and visually eclectic use of material culture. Photographs have become permanently fixed into the cemetery space. Images that had an economic life as part of their initial appropriation and consumption are no longer transferable economic objects of commodity or exchange. Hallam and Hawkini suggest, and I open quote, the temporal spatial positioning of objects during the phases of dying, death, and mourning often inflects their meanings together with the relationship they bear to the living or the dead body. End of quote. It's in the experience, the treatment, and the relationship built upon them that I suggest my informants invest time and energy. So it is in extending the biography of the living onto a biography of the dead and on the material which continues to extend. Yeah? So we don't just exist as living beings, we also exist as this other, which will become a little more clear as I go on. So I have here Tatiana, the guardian of my dead. She looks after them as she will look after me when I die. Okay? So Seal suggests that communities develop complex social-cultural practices in order to assist persons deal with grief and mourning, what Chesson refers to as secondary processes of mortuary rituals. I argue that secondary mortuary practices, both in the cemetery and at home, are facilitated via the use and appropriation of material objects and images, more so now by the permanence and the permanent use of photographic portrait in the cemetery and other alternative spaces of the dead. In the cemetery of San Rafael, objects on graves have already had their own social cycles, redeveloped through a personal daily life, collective social rituals, and extended into the spaces of the dead. You must notice that objects are constantly being repositioned, rebuilt, and mutated into material and visual tools that people use for exploring their sacred manifestations of commemorative rituals and people's everyday engagement with their dead. So, through the ritual it came to light that the use of material culture by the communities in Álvaro Obregón assisted their ability to remember, hold on to the memories to maintain family unity and extended processes of bereavement. The material, in effect, embodied the complex issues concerning the immortality of the person and the mortality of his biological body. For my informants, the human body is a constant reminder of the ephemeral fate of the flesh. I argue that for my informants, the use of material culture in funerary practices facilitates the dead person from being forgotten as social agents, protecting them from being visualized or remembered only as corpses. I suggest that social visibility becomes central to memory-making practices. In this way, dead persons remain inclusive as social members of an extended family, playing a dynamic role in the lives of their living. Connerton follows on to argue that these memories which people attempt to hold on to once the biological body has ceased to exist, or when it departs, are embedded in the body of ritual performances and material culture. Even Connerton reminds us of this, that the body is also the body of the performances are also intrinsic in the body, not only of the body of the performance, but also of the body that is making the performance itself. So all these multi-layers are all intertwined. They're not separate. They work together. So I suggest that they're also found embedded in people's daily lives. So it's a bit of Connerton's work. I will argue that material culture is a valuable vehicle and tool which the communities of Álvaro Obregón use actively and dynamically in order to bond with their dead. Maintaining sociability and connectivity that Stephen Hawking argues assists in maintaining the dead symbolically as social participants. I have found that this is of particular interest in Panteón San Rafael. Material culture used for recalling memory through the dead is not a new phenomenon. What makes it interesting in a contemporary urban Mexican setting is a reflexive and syncretic ability of my informants to appropriate the dead and export them to visuals that challenge the invisibility and privacy of existing landscapes of the dead. So this particular lady here, the grandmother of this young man, was taken in the privacy of her home. So this is the private world that she opened her doors to. And this is the photograph of him there, the mother of this young man, when he had cancer. As a way of dealing with his death, she photographed the whole process. And this is not somebody that's ever picked up a camera before other than on birthdays or special events. But for some reason she felt that by cataloguing the death of her son and his illness allowed her to create a form of dialogue between her and her son that was away from the illness that he was going through, with an awareness that he was about to die. But she didn't want death to become the main community, that bridge between them. So she allowed this activity to become that bridge, which allowed the mother and her dying son to bond and connect together, which now allows the family to remember the son as a social living agent well beyond his death. And you have him there, his cremated ashes are there on the left-hand side. So, material culture has adapted and influenced the many facets of culture of the dead in contemporary Mexico. A large industry has evolved that serves the needs of the consumers of material culture on a daily basis, serving the needs of the mourners and the industry of the dead. Even though toys and objects used in graves are mass-produced and easily accessible to a general public, they take on a life of their own when they reach the cemetery and surpass their initial functionality. So the example of the Tatiana doll that I just showed you. So her initial functionality has surpassed that of the doll, and now she becomes, just like any other agent, a gatekeeper of this particular grave. So Lomnitz suggests that Mexican mass consumption of material culture of the dead has objectified and beautified death, turning it into a national performance. Writers, artists, academics have placed the aesthetics of death at the center of social and cultural processes of Mexican national identity and processes of memory making, dedicating most of the debate in the attempt to decipher the resulting manifestations of the phenomenon of the festivities and culture of the Day of the Dead. My research found that by looking at the mask of the ritual, it really gave you access to the person behind it. Little attention in academic and popular literature goes beyond the mask, instead being overwhelmed by the aesthetics and the performance. My research looks at Álvaro Obregón's funerary material culture from the ground up, from the eyes of the community that frequents and works the landscapes of the dead and maintains them on a daily basis. The image here on the left-hand side at the top, she's a female gravedigger, and she's actually exhuming an ex-colleague that worked at the cemetery. And he was the night keeper, so he will actually look after the cemetery during the night. And when he died, she buried him. And now that his grave needs to be reused, she now has to exhume his work colleague. So she's having to face all these various different stages and having to make sense of it, having to deal with it, having to go home. And how do you remember your colleague that you work with day to day? Do you remember him as a cadaver, as a corpse? Or did you remember him, like on the right-hand side, as a social person, as a friend, as a colleague? So the photographic image or a portrait of a person in comparison to objects like toys and religious items are treated more than just iconic material representations of the dead. Okay, so I'm going to go on to this other image because it's part of the next part. So here you have, for example, an exhumation of two persons to allow the space for the next. And the reason for that is that Mexico City has a mortality rate of 900,000 persons per year. So how does a capital handle this level of mortality? How do you manage 900,000 bodies? Especially in a Catholic community whereby cremation, it really is at your last resort. It's very, very expensive. There's only about 7 crematoriums, working crematoriums in Mexico City. They can only handle about 16 bodies per day. 16 times 7, and then you realize that you're left short by a lot of bodies. So a lot of the bodies are taken out of the city to be reburied in family graves outside in the villages, or the graves are exhumed on a 7-year period. So every 7 years, you're legally allowed to make the space available. You exhume the body, you place them in bags like this, and you rebury your family members together with the new body that's being buried. Okay. And here again, these are objects which are found on the exhumations. And what I do with my photographs as well, I allow the voice of the community to come forward. So all the texts are taken from the conversations that I had with the people that I was working with the mourners, with people that were coming to see their dead and were coming to exhume their family members. Here's a very nice example. My mother is in heaven. I hope I also go there so we can be together. And this is, I interviewed a child that was coming to visit her mother and had placed this image for her on Mother's Day. Here again. So you can see there's a constant continuity, not only of remembrance, but also looking after your dead. Maintaining them, looking after them, making them feel at home. And these are ways of showing the cemetery space in a different kind of light. And then you've got another. This is a 360-degree angle of the cemetery space. So you can turn that around into a balloon, a huge balloon, and stand in the middle, and you'll be in the center of the cemetery. And wherever you go, on a 300-degree angle, this is that balloon being opened up. Another format and ways of photographing the space. So here again, although the actual funeral is in the middle, it's not outside, it's external context. So other things are happening around that. These are also taking place. Okay, so this is which I want to continue with. This Mr. Don Panchito. I became a very good friend with Mr. Don Panchito on this day, and I met Mr. Don Panchito when I was photographing the space with a 5.4 camera, and I had it on a big tripod with the bellows over my head, and there I was, very prominent in the space. And he just found me very curious. I was the other. I was the, this exotic thing that he just came across, and he wanted to know why I was there. What was it that I was doing on a daily basis, 7 days a week, all day long, with this huge bag of cameras? And me as a photographer, I don't hide. I come and I say, this is what I am, this is what I'm doing, this is who I am, this is my work, and this is the way that I approach the space. Because there's a particular purpose for that, but we can have that in a kind of discussion after. So it wasn't only that I was looking for informants. Informants were looking for who I was too, and that's how I met Don Panchito. We sat down. He said, "Oh, I was really intrigued with you. I was really fascinated with what you were doing here." And then we started talking. And through these conversations, he invited me to his home, to meet his family, to photograph his daughter's wedding, to photograph his birthday, and then eventually he said, "Come and meet my wife." And he introduced me to his wife. So, the photographic image of a portrait of a person in comparison to objects like toys and religious items are treated more than just iconic material presentations of the dead. In a small chapel above her grave, Don Panchito has photographic portrait of his late wife, Doña Matilde. On his weekly visits, Don Panchito burns her a candle brings her fresh flowers and talks to her. I suggest that due to an extended relationship built upon these portraits, the image itself is attributed with human qualities, spiritual qualities, and also of personhood. Images and objects are all that remains of the visual presence of the living once the flesh decomposes. So what do we remember, and what exceeds the immediate memory of a generation to transcend from the private to the public or collective memory of the person or performance? I suggest that continuity was found to be a critical factor that assists my informants, in this case Don Panchito, to maintain a sociability, social relations still with his wife and also with the space. Don Panchito's extended visits to the cemetery are directed towards the image of his wife, and even though other images are placed in the chapel, he talks to his wife and not to a material object that reflects her image. He feels that the image of his wife in the cemetery chapel of San Rafael embodies a relationship that has been taken over by the body of the image. The photograph's mnemonic capacities overcome the absence of the person. It protects the dead from the ephemeral human body, preserving information shifted from the decomposing body buried in the coffin to the body of the photographic image, protecting the invisibility of the body, and as Hallam and Horkey asserts, that the material presence in the face of an embodied absence. End quote. Assists Don Panchito to maintain a social relationship with a something, with his wife, rather than an absence or a corpse. There is a direct and trusting relationship that is created, where material objects are designated as aspects and extensions of persons. They can become potent resources of memories. Many of my informants whom I met in the seminary told me that they related to the dead body as a living organism and as a living spirit. And just because the dead can't get up and walk, it did not stop them from being the person they loved. Portraits used in cemeteries are not post-mortem images. It is answered this very premise that I argue that the photography of the dead is still the photography of the living. The person lives through the images in the cemetery, providing the social link that the mourner needs to bond with the dead as members of the human community. I met an informant that visits his family graves in San Rafael every 3 months. He told me that when he visits his family, he was not able to visit his friends. He did not know where they were buried. It was not until one late afternoon, as he walked through the cemetery, and that then he noticed an image of a person he knew. As years passed, he recognized more and more of his friends. I asked him what the image meant to him. And then he replied, and I open quote, "Initially I was only able to visit my family, and now I can visit my friends. Now I can also talk to them." End quote. Images to my informants humanize the text on the gravestone, providing the dead a social and visual presence extended from the invisibility and privacy of the family grave to the public spaces of the cemetery. So I met also a curator, an arts curator there as well, that he collects mortuary images, and he collects all kind of paraphernalia regarding and connected to death and dying. And he, kind of reminded me that your image or portrait provides permanence of what is no longer there. So it holds to that as well, that it is the evidence of what will no longer be. And we have a consciousness that we will no longer be, but we also are quite aware that we would like to continue to be, and how do we formulate that? So his reflections on photographs as tools to record people's realities and experiences brings to light a local understanding of why photography as a memory maker was and still is an important medium for the communities in Álvaro Obregón. While walking through San Rafael, I found many permanent but also photographic images slowly decomposing in time, as one will imagine the decomposing dead persons inside the graves. The photographic image, in comparison to other objects, is fragile and with organic qualities. So you might say, well, why a photograph? The photograph is also going to disintegrate. Isn't it better to actually create that link with a material object that would continue far longer than a photographic image can. Photography hasn't been around that long, so we can't say photography will be there 500 years' time. There are no photographs that have lasted that long. So it is something that we're entrusted on, something that is just as organic as our living body. So there must be something there, something else that Mangan wants us to link to it. So the photographic images in comparison to other objects is fragile and it's organic. We could imagine that they would have a short-lived presence in the cemetery. So why more and more of these images are appearing in the graves of Álvaro Obregón next to other more long-lasting items like statues, plastic dolls or toys? So then, to my informants in Álvaro Obregón, it was the photographic image that visualized the dead and assisted them to continue their extended relationships with their relatives, not as corpses, but as persons. It allows us to understand that we also have to entrust ourselves onto our following generations as well. Yeah? So in that sense, Carlos, I'll kind of finish this section of the paper by reminding us of Carlos Reyes, a documentary photographer, who reminds me, and I quote, "Photography transcends the incommunication of an instant communication. A poetic narrative of life and magic realism emerge from the footprints of memories." So in here is where I will end this section of the paper. So I kind of show you how important material culture is in maintaining these links, these things, but also in kind of trying to show you that the photograph is not just a piece of paper. And much of the understanding of photography and the dead is to do with the framing of the person. That we believe that the person exists within that frame. And even Cadaver talks about the framing, and the dead exists. And the photograph is almost like the graveyard for the dead, and that's where we all end up in this framework. But from my understanding, I try and pursue that and extend it further, because for me the photograph is an agency. It has personhood, it has biographies, it's organic, it lives. And photographs die. They are born from something, and they die into something, and they have those transformations as well. So this is very good when we talk about, Connaughton's work, and when we talk about Gell's work, and when we talk even about Latour's work on objects and icons, and how all that can exist. And all this is embedded in there. They're not just third agency, they don't have secondary agency, they have primary agency. They are extensions of us. And they're as delicate as we are. So they need that kind of looking after and so on. So where I move on with this is basically to show you a little bit of how I relate to my informants that I met, and how I use photography and text and this kind of interrelation, this communication. And I will show you this example that I come forward with now in understanding, for example, why is it that there is so much exhumations in Mexico? Why is it that 900,000 bodies, wouldn't it be obvious that the way forward would be to exhume? It's clean, cheap, fast, we do it here, so why can't they do it there? And so anthropology allows us to dig deeper into this kind of other understandings that purely via artistic practice we wouldn't be able to extend. So how can we create art that has this social realm with it? How can we produce photography from an anthropological umbrella and vice versa, anthropology with this visual? What is it that makes it richer as a practice? And for me, the enrichment is not trying to find this kind of balance between, okay, this is what the text does, this is what the visual does, this is what the photographs do. That's the power of the text, the power of the image. Of course, they're both incredibly powerful. They both do great jobs, but they can do an amazing job together. And that's what I do, is what can bring these two amazing processes, art practice, ethnography, anthropology, the text, together, because it enriches our understanding of the field. It brings it forward in a way that we would not be able to do so in such a rich way if we were only concentrating either purely on the visual, purely on the art, or purely on the text. The collaboration, I think, is a way forward to be able to have that enrichment. And a way to do that, for example, is why do Mexicans fear cremation? What is it that they choose? Exhumation. So I asked one of the grave diggers, who's been working in the graves, with graves and exhuming bodies for the last 20 years, expecting a particular kind of answer. And this is the answer that I got. And these are all obviously cremated urns. But I do not want to be cremated. So then, why? It will hurt, she answered. What do you mean it's going to hurt? You're dead. And that's why it will hurt. Because she doesn't believe that when her body dies, she's dead. And being burned alive, even if you're dead, it will still hurt quite a bit. So then you have to get into their head, you have to get into them, which most journalistic practices don't allow that insertion. Because photojournalism, you've got to get in, do the work, get out with the pictures, and you rely on the quality of the work to be there, the visuality. You know, an image speaks 1,000 words. Of course it does. But which 1,000 words do you want to bring to your audience? What 1,000 words do you want that audience to read from your work? And that's very important for ethnography, important for social science, but it's also important with this collaboration. That you are able to collaborate with art and social science and research together. Both can enrich the field experience and enrich the analysis and enrich, that participatory process between the audience and the work. And here I have another example. Again, this is now their new home. It is comforting. I can spend time talking to my mother, and I know that she knows we have not forgotten her. And he is preparing her mausoleum. So it's not just about putting the images together, but it's also putting the text in relation to the images. How do you collage them? How do you put them together? As you see here, he is two pillars, and they are two pillars, and he is somehow holding the dead. He is looking after them. So how do you bring, your visual practice to make an understanding of what is going on in this person's daily life? I'm not sure if I will ever see her again, but what is life without the hope that death is not the end? So I will finish now with this image, and this is a difficult one to to show normally, because obviously, death is not an easy subject to discuss, and even less easy to visualize. But this could be an interesting one to discuss in a discussion as to what you feel that this speaks to you and you understand from it. And this also again plays with the role of cremation, exhumation, with the national identity of death and dying in Mexico, back to pre-Hispanic past, back to the indigenous communities, and so forth. Gender relations are there. There's quite a lot there. So I don't know if you want me to go through it a little bit, or whether you just wish to read it and then you can see what you feel from it. But yeah, so this is pretty much an understanding of that, and how you can bring art to also be fluid and open. So it's not about us giving you the question and all the answers, and this is what you need to come out with. But there has to be that openness as well, that the answers are there, but it has to be read. And the training that we give to writing is very vigorous. But how much training do we give in the visual? So in a particular kind of finish now, for example, if anybody has a camera here, I can borrow and raid my mobile, we can use that as my camera. What is this? Just a pen, piece of material object, put it on the table, has no meaning. Just plastic, a little bit of ink inside. What's this phone? Again, material, plastic, concrete falling on the floor, it breaks. What is it? Just nothing. Again, just an object. Great things have been done with this pen when it is here in my hand. Great things have been achieved when this camera goes onto my hand. We can't escape the author. We can't escape that responsibility that we have, that what we're creating. We are responsible. We are the author of our creations. And if we don't develop ourselves, then we can't expect this pen to write what's up here and what we experience and what we see. And I think that's been a great lesson for me, that the visual, and particularly in the particular case, the dead, to my mourners, rely on us. We are responsible for our dead, because we are the next generation of dead bodies. And if we forget our dead, what is to say that we won't be forgotten in the process? And these are our tools, that we don't get forgotten. Thank you very much. Thank you.
For your inspiring lecture. And right now we can just open the floor for the questions or discussion.